Hello everybody, I bought the new Steam Deck OLED model and I've been using it for a while, so in this video I wanted to talk about whether I think it's worth upgrading if you have the original Steam Deck models. So the one I purchased here is the 512GB OLED model, the one with the glossy screen, not the etched glass. So I was a pretty heavy user of the original Steam Decks. I had two of them. One was the 512GB version, that one came with the etched glass, and the 64GB version, which is also a glossy screen, but I modified that and put Windows on it. In case you're wondering about selling your old Steam Decks, I did end up selling both of mine on eBay. So the 64GB model went for $315.32. That includes the shipping and taxes, so that's basically the total that the buyer paid. And after all the eBay fees, I got to keep $243.25. The 512GB model sold for $352.42, which I got to keep exactly $273 of. Now the problem is the UPS did happen to lose the 64GB model, so I had to file a claim for that. I didn't buy insurance, so I probably won't be getting all of it back, but if you guys want an update, I'll put it in the description later on. Also, additionally, Valve hasn't released all the drivers for Windows yet, so if you're thinking of putting Windows on one of these Steam Deck OLEDs, you're probably going to miss out on some of the hardware features. I think most importantly is you won't get any sound right now, but Valve will eventually put up those drivers, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Now, this isn't going to be a review of the Steam Deck OLED. Valve has already put up a whole website on what has changed from this one compared to the previous model. But I'm not going to go through that. I'm basically going to go from the very beginning during the unboxing and tell you exactly what I noticed was different, because some of these changes you won't notice at all, or they won't make a difference to your usability and stuff. So let's start from the beginning with the unboxing. So here's the box for the Steam Deck OLED. It looks exactly the same as the original Steam Deck. I feel like this box is super recognizable, which is probably why UPS lost my package. But whoever's hands it ends up in, I hope they enjoy my old Steam Deck. So starting with the charger, it looks the same, except it has the logo on it now, and this cord looks a lot longer than the previous one. It's a minor change that I think will be helpful, especially if you play your Steam Deck plugged in a lot. And I don't know if you can see it here, but it looks like it's the exact same wattage as the previous Steam Deck charger. Okay, and so the carrying case looks the same. The logo is an orange color now, instead of blue, which was on the 512GB that I had, and gray for the 64GB model. Looks like the holding strap on the bottom is pretty much the same. It feels a little bit looser than before. I hope that doesn't mean that the charger's gonna fall out, but we'll try sticking it in right now and see. Okay, it looks fine. It's not gonna fall out or anything. But they might have loosened it just so it's easier to stick in there. And here's the Steam Deck out of the case. Everything looks pretty much the same. Now it's not turning on here, so usually that means I have to plug it in first. And looks like the boot logo is also orange. And man, that OLED screen really looks pretty good right here because it does not have any light bleed. The 512GB model I had with the etched glass didn't have much of a problem with light bleed, but the 64GB model had a lot of weird spots on the screen with light bleed on the edges. But this one looks pretty much completely black on the edge. So this is after I set it up, but what I noticed while setting it up was that the plastic feels different. It's a little bit rougher feeling, like it has a little bit of texture to it. It does feel a little bit lighter, but it's not super noticeable. The touchpads definitely feel much better. The haptics are kind of similar to a MacBook's touchpad if you've felt those recently. Instead of vibrating, it kind of feels like it's tapping at you. The thumbsticks have changed and it definitely feels grippier. The D-pad feels a little bit clickier. It feels like the buttons and the D-pad are also slightly higher off of the plastic of the Steam Deck. The Steam button and the menu button is definitely clicky now. The original one were just kind of mushy. You couldn't feel whether it was clicked or not. By the way, all I did was transfer my Steam Deck SD card from the previous one into this new one, and it did work. So that's definitely a thing you can do if you have all your games on the SD card. Now, a lot of people have already talked about this screen, but I'm going to be a little different and try to convince you that it's not much of a difference from the previous model screens. Now, of course, it does have all the advantages of OLED. You get the deep blacks, you get very saturated colors, You don't have as much light bleed, and the contrast is really good. But since the last Steam Deck update, Valve has added controls to change the saturation and the color temperature of the screen. And if you use the previous model's controls and put all the saturation up, it's actually really close to the OLED model in saturation. Also, I have all 3 Steam Decks here that I had, and if you notice, the OLED model is in the middle. The color temperature is a little bit weird. It's a little bit less accurate. See the game called Toem? It's a black and white game, so it should just have shades of gray. But if you look here, the OLED model has slightly purplish hue to it. And that's actually in real life. That's what it kind of looks like. It's just slightly off. Now, you probably wouldn't notice at all if you didn't have a comparison between the two right next to each other. Like, I didn't notice it until I had the other Steam Decks right next to it. And it's definitely a little bit weird that the color temperature is a little off. I did try to change it in the color temperature settings, but I couldn't quite get it to look right. And I think that's because the OLED model just has a different configuration to it. Now, I never thought that the previous models had really great screens, but it's not so bad as long as it's not compared to something better. Like, if you're always looking at your phone, like my iPhone has an OLED screen, if you have a Samsung Galaxy phone that has an OLED screen, those are going to look a lot better. Or even like a Nintendo Switch with an OLED screen, those are going to look a lot better than the original Steam Deck screen. But if you don't have them next to each other, you probably wouldn't even notice. And that's how I kind of felt. Like, I never thought that I was lacking anything with the original Steam Deck screen. For most games that are like brighter in color, like, you won't get much of a difference between the screens. Now, you will get a huge difference with darker colored games or any games with the dark background. But even then, it wasn't so bad on the original screen. Now, there's some other small things, like I noticed that it's nice to have the performance bump because previous AAA games, I used to have to run at 40 Hz, and now with the 90 Hz screen and the slight performance bump, you might be able to run it at 45 Hz, and it might feel just that much smoother. Now, one of the low-key best things about this new Steam Deck is that the fans are much quieter. It's great for late night in bed. If you have a partner that's very sensitive to sound, they probably will not think this sound is offensive. Now, I feel like the previous Steam Deck got pretty loud with the fans every time you played a AAA high graphical game. But this Steam Deck, while you can hear it, it is very much like a whisperer sound. It's not offensive at all. Now, the other thing is battery life is noticeably better. I've been using this for a while, and even during this video, I've been testing various games, and I had this brightness on full blast for all the comparisons and stuff. But the battery life is just so much better than previously. Now, it won't be that much of a difference if you play the most graphical games. If you're playing Cyberpunk or something like that, it might last you maybe 30 minutes longer than the previous Steam Deck. But that 30 minutes can translate to extra hours of gameplay if you play like a lighter weight game, like an indie game or something. I really think battery life is one of the biggest improvements that the Steam Deck OLED has. And honestly, it kind of pushes it past all the other handhelds on the market too. The Steam Deck's biggest competitor is Windows handhelds like the ROG Ally or the Lenovo Legion Go. And those just can't beat it in battery right now. The Steam Deck OLED model is like the one you have to get. So out of everything I talked about, I'm going to rank what I think is the best reason to get the new Steam Deck OLED. And this is in order of importance. So number 1, I think battery life. If you're looking for more battery life, that is the reason to upgrade to the Steam Deck OLED. If you're using your previous Steam Deck with a battery pack and you just got tired of carrying that battery pack around, this Steam Deck will probably last just as long without the battery pack. And then you can add the battery pack if you need even more time. So battery is definitely the number 1 reason I think if you're looking for an upgrade, you should consider this. After that, I think, is the noise level. Now, the noise level is kind of subjective depending on what your use case is. Now, I tend to play in the dark, in the quiet, and I'd have to raise the volume of the Steam Deck in order to kind of buffer out the sound, the fan noise. You can actually lower the performance and get even quieter fan noise now, if you needed that. But anyways, fan noise was definitely my number 2 reason. And then comes the Steam Deck OLED screen. Like I said, if you don't have another screen to compare the old Steam Deck screen to all the time, you're probably not going to notice that much of a difference. Like, I was happy playing my previous Steam Deck, and I've only noticed that it's so much better when I put it next to this OLED model. For the games that I play, it wouldn't make that much of a difference anyways. Like, I could play Dark Souls, and while it has a lot of dark scenes in it, a lot of it is also bright, and it didn't make any difference in those bright scenes. So I would say the screen is the third reason to get it. I think all the other changes could be put in number 4. Things like the controls being a little bit better, the thumbsticks feeling a little grippier, those type of things I don't think make a big difference at all. All those feel nice, but they didn't affect the gameplay and the way I play games at all. So I would say those are all number 4. So if you don't value any of these as high on the list for you to upgrade, and you're okay with keeping your old one, I would say just keep your old Steam Deck and wait for Steam Deck 2. I'll see you guys again next time. Goodbye.